So, what I was saying was that the reason for the difference between these two books has to do with their different point of view. Now let's look, for instance, where does Qumran end? So Qumran starts earlier, but also ends earlier. If you look, Qumran ends with the victory of Judas Maccabee over another messenger called Nicanor. And it says that, therefore, because of this victory, line 35-36 of chapter 15, they even cut out the tongue of godless Nicanor and hung him up inside of the temple or something. Oh, they hung his head from the citadel. And they all passed a decree by unanimous vote, never to let the day go unobserved, but to celebrate the 13th day of the 12th month, called Adar in Aramaic, the eve of the day of Mordecai. So this is a holiday that I'm not aware any Jews observe. Maybe he does, but he's gone home now, so he can't tell me. But I'm not aware that any of them observe this particular holiday. And I don't know that any of them actually observe this, but it's called the Day of Nicanor, and it's on the eve of the Day of Mordecai. So what is the Day of Mordecai? The Day of Mordecai. What's the Day of Mordecai? It's another Jewish holiday.
Is that Purim?
Purim. They didn't call it Purim yet, but it's what the Jews call Purim. It's the story of Esther in the Bible. These people don't even know that. I don't think the book of Esther is missing from the Dead Sea Scrolls, whether by accident or otherwise. I think otherwise. And the reason I think it's missing from among the scrolls, the only biblical book that's not represented in the scroll fragments, probably the reason it's missing is because if you know anything about the festival of Purim, Esther, as it's called here, the Day of Mordecai, Esther gets into the harem of the king, and I guess through her sexual expertise, convinces him to do all kinds of different things. Politically, I mean. I think that the Zealots and others represented by the literature in the Dead Sea Scrolls would not have approved of a Jewish woman, even for that purpose, to get into some foreign king's harem to try to get him to be favorably disposed. I mean, she meant well, but I think they wouldn't have approved of a book like that. So I don't think it is represented in the Dead Sea Scrolls for that reason. There's another book of the Bible, in the regular Bible, I think it's called the Book of Judges, where a woman, I think her name is Yael. And there's another book called Judith, which is in the Apocrypha, where what the woman does is sneaks into the foreign king's tent and hammers a peg into his head. That's what the good Jewish patriotic woman does to the foreign invader. Doesn't get into the harem and seduce him into giving benefits to her people. I admit the second behavior is more effective, but I think rabbinic Judaism, with all due respect to my colleague here, would endorse the second kind of behavior. But the zealotry of some of these other forms that move into perhaps Islam and Al-Qaeda and things like that would prefer the first form, the first form of behavior, if you understand. Anyway, so we have a holiday that, interesting enough, how is it decided? Well, there's another holiday that's going to be decreed by unanimous vote. What's that? Hanukkah. In this book, it's going to be given to the vote of the people, and they ratify it, I think, by vote. It's the only holidays that I think we're familiar with that are not, given by God. Revealed in the Torah of Moses or something. These are holidays that are ratified by vote, like Thanksgiving or something. So I think that's pretty honest and straightforward, and I think that's the new period. This one is only celebrated by Catholics, I think, because it's in their Bible. But I don't know of any Jews who celebrate the day of Nicanor. But what does it celebrate? His head hanging, hanging from the scaffold someplace. Never mind. The point is, Maccabees 2 ends there. Nothing about Judas's death. Nothing about Mattathias is not even mentioned. He's a non-person. Where does Maccabees 1 end? Let's look. Well, Maccabees 1 goes through Judas's victories, his death. I'll go back and cover these in a moment. His succession by Jonathan, his one brother. That would be in, oh, by the way, here's the day of Nicanor in Maccabees 1, 739. So it says in 750, the 13th of Adar is celebrated annually. So 739 to 50 in Maccabees 1 is chapter 15 or so in Maccabees 2. And so as you can see, chapter 7 in Maccabees 1 is only halfway through the book. So Maccabees 1 covers material not present in Maccabees 2. Maccabees 2 cover material not present in Maccabees 1. And now the opposite occurs here. In any case, I'll go back over this, but quickly, Judas is killed in chapter 9. 9:19, we have the funeral of Judas. I find this stuff because I've got titles under my sections, which would help you guys if you want to hurry and find these things. Then Jonathan succeeds him, his brother. And we'll talk about him when we go back over this quickly. But he is ultimately killed at a banquet where some treacherous people managed to betray him and kill him. We have some material about Jonathan's relation with the Spartans in chapter 12 of Maccabees 2. And then at the end of chapter 12, Jonathan is killed, I think it's at a banquet or someplace. Anyway, by treachery. Maybe not at a banquet. Then Simon takes over, the third brother. Actually, if you look at the original material from the genealogies that were given peripherally, I think Simon is the oldest brother. And then, it says, I don't see this. Anyway, he is with some of his sons at a banquet or something. In any case, I don't have this exactly right here. In chapter 13, he's killed too. And we have some more letters to Sparta, which I'll talk about. In this one letter here, chapter 14, 29, there was frequent fighting in the country. Simon, son of Mattathias, a Scion of the line of Yoyarib, again, that he is of the priestly course of Yoyarib. Oh yes, and I guess he hasn't been killed yet here. He assumes the high priestly office in 47, line 47 of chapter 14. And they inscribed this decree on bronze tablets set up in the temple precincts. I think Simon's high priesthood is ratified also by vote. I think you'll see at some point that it's ratified, so it's again, which for the Zealots is a legitimate form of election to the high priest. He's a proper high priest, but his high priest is ratified by vote. He has two sons, I think, chapter 16, called Judas and John. And then finally, there's a great banquet, line 15, that's the banquet. Simon and his sons were drunk, and this other traitor rushed out and killed them. But one of the sons, John Hyrcanus he's called, escapes. And line 22, the end of the book. Overcome as he was by the news, John arrested the men who had come to kill him and put them to death, since he already knew their murderous designs. The rest of John's acts, the battles he fought, the exploits he performed, the city walls he built, and all the other achievements are to be found recorded in the annals of his priesthood, from the day he succeeded his father as high priest. So who is this fellow with whom Maccabees 1 ends? It's around 134 BC or something like that. We'll get all this sorted out by next time. So, when was Maccabees 1 written? Clearly after that. And what is it written, what purpose is it written to serve? To legitimate the succession of John Hyrcanus. Doesn't bother telling about his activities. It says that's all written up in another thing. This book is to legitimate the succession of John Hyrcanus to the high priesthood. Who is John Hyrcanus? Is he Judas Maccabee's son? No.
Simon.
He's Simon, another of the brother's sons. So really, you have to go back to Mattathias to legitimate the whole family. So the reason the book goes back and applies the zealot, high priestly legitimatization to Mattathias is to bring in the whole family under its aegis or rubric, so that all of the brothers can be considered, legitimate heirs to the covenant of Phineas. So there's a political and historical purpose to this book that is missing from two Maccabees. So what is more authentic? Parts of 1 Maccabees and parts of 2 Maccabees, when you read in between the lines. Do I think Mattathias was an important figure? Well, Josephus has him in his book. So from here on in, we have to go to Josephus to get the rest of the history. But Josephus does have him in his book, and he basically follows 1 Maccabees. But I think he probably knows 1 Maccabees, so I'm not sure if that tells us a whole lot that Josephus follows the presentation of 1 Maccabees. I always like the odd presentation, the one that is the surprising one, because to me often people who want you to accept their work don't try to put surprises in it. And I have a feeling that maybe Mattathias wasn't that important. Maybe he didn't even do all the things that he said to do. Maybe Judas really was the important figure, and Onias and the priesthood prior to him. Now, before I get into the actual events and try to finish this up for you tonight, so we can get into Josephus next time, let me just look, did we do this Ecclesiasticus stuff? All right, that is another apocryphal book. If I can find it in this welter of books. This is not Ecclesiastes. Keep your finger in the Maccabee books. I'm going to read it because it has, and I'm going to read a bit of it, because it's a huge book. This is a wisdom book. that is not in the regular Protestant Jewish Bible. It's in the Catholic Bible. Again, came down through, obviously, through Egyptian transmission, probably through Jerome, the Catholic scholar in the 4th, 5th century who did the Latin Bible and so on and so forth. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. It's a wisdom sort of, telling you how to live type book. So, for instance, chapter 1. Oh, first of all, before chapter 1, in the introduction, called Translators Forward in my book, this book is actually dated in the 38th year of the late King Euergetes, as I have here, 170 to 117. So therefore, my footnote, it's good enough, I don't care, says this is written about 132 BC. Somewhat like the time of the other books. I'm sure one Maccabees is about then, I'm sure 2 Maccabees is about then too. A lot of literary activity here in Egypt at this time. This is written in Egypt, obviously. I think 2 Mac was written in Egypt too. When I arrived in Egypt, I had already spent some time there. I found this work and so on and so forth. So he says that he translated it or did something with it. So that gives you a date for this. Here, for instance, line 14, to fear the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That's a famous type saying. We hear those things quite often. I'm going to skip along here. There's the usual sort of, moral recommendations. Look, you can, line 10 of chapter 4, to be a father to orphans, and as good as a husband to widows, you will become a son, is to be like a son of the Most High God. So you could become like a son of the Most High God here, which is interesting when you think of someone who is like a son of the Most High God. Adoption is sonship, if you want to call it that. You're not a real son. Righteous behavior makes you a son. I'm not going to mess around with this book. You can read it yourself. For instance, chapter 9. You won't like these things. Women's beauty has led many astray. Never sit down with a married woman or sit at a table with her drinking wine. That means people can't resist these temptations. 10:3, an uneducated king will ruin his people. When a man comes to die, 10:11, his inheritance will be the creeping worms. It doesn't yet have a doctrine of resurrection of the dead in this book. No resurrection of the dead. What other book, for instance, doesn't have a doctrine of resurrection of the dead yet? Huh? Job. We talked about that last time, right? Because if Job did have a doctrine of resurrection of the dead, it wouldn't be a problem. Because the question Job poses is, why do the good or the innocent suffer? Well, they're going to enjoy the afterlife. But if there's no afterlife, what's the answer to the question? Job doesn't give one. He doesn't have one. You should, behave righteously anyway. What his answer basically is. Should be a dutiful servant of God or whatever. Okay, so this is 40, 50 chapters of this kind of thing. Like chapter 19:20, wisdom consists entirely in fearing the Lord. My 24, wisdom speaks her own praises. It's like Athena, I come forth from the mouth of the Most High God. Line 24:3. Sin began with a woman. This is right out of Paul almost. Line 25, 24, 33. The reason there are 2 numbers often because it's in parallel columns. So the numbers get confused like that. Sin began with a woman, and thanks to her we all must die. Who's that? Eve. So Paul's original sin here is in this book. He must have read it or something. It's not a very big doctrine in it, but it shows how they were thinking at that time. Let's see. Moving along here to the important stuff here, which really comes in chapter 44. You can read all the rest of it if you want. It's a very boring book. Now let us praise famous men. That is a very famous phrase from even the Apocryphal Bible. But in the Hebrew, we found a Hebrew version of this book. It was found in the Cairo Geza, the same place that the Damascus Document was found. Remember I told you that there was this Geza in Cairo. What did I say a Geza was? A place associated with synagogues where they buried or hid dead manuscripts they weren't using anymore, but usually had the name of God in it. In the Geza, though, it turned out there were vast amounts of marriage licenses, letters, everything else. And people have used it to produce a picture of the Mediterranean society in the Middle Ages because of such a vast treasure trove of documents. Geza, G-E-N-I-Z-A-H. G-E-N-I-Z-A-H. I don't have the energy to turn around and write it. So this was found, a Hebrew version. We didn't know there was a Hebrew version. So the Hebrew is Anshe Hesed. Now let us praise Anshe Hesed. Anshe is the plural of man. So Anshe Hesed, men of piety. Not famous men, not illustrious men, as it comes into the Greek, but Anshe Hesed. We should remember, Hesed is the root of Hasidim, which we're going to meet momentarily in Maccabees 1 and 2. The warriors of Judas Maccabee are called Hasidim, the pious ones. I think we'll find that the pious ones, as it's translated into English, I put two S's, as I told you, to make the parallel with Zadik. Hebrew is three-letter roots, Z-D-K, H-S-D. Vowels don't matter. Put the vowels like that, it's a noun. Put the vowels like this, I-M is a plural. Put the vowels like this, it's a personal noun. It's a personal adjective. Sadiq, righteous one. Hasid, pious one. Hesed, piety. Zedek, righteousness. And you make your words up like that. You build them up out of the three-letter roots. Arabic is the same. Aramaic is the same. These are called Semitic languages. So I like to parallel with Sadiq, so therefore I go with a single pious one as a Hasid. But you'll often find it spelled with one S. I don't see why you would spell it. Maybe it came into the Greek with one S, but I don't see why you would spell it with one S if you spell Sadiq with two Ds. You double the D, you double the S. That's how I see it, but maybe I'm just, a jerk or something. Okay, so this is pious ones. Look who they are. Enoch, line 16. He was perfect and taken up to God. We've done that. Noah is perfect. That's the one who's perfect. Noah was righteous and perfect in his generation, according to the Bible. And an everlasting covenant was made with him, that never again would there be a flood. Abraham, none equal to him in glory. Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, line 45:7. Everlasting covenant was made with him and gave him the priesthood of the people. This is a priestly book, we think, because it emphasizes the priesthood. More about Aaron, a lot about Aaron. You see, he's got Moses is short shrift, 45:1-6. Aaron is 6 to 27. So you see how priestly it is by its emphasis. And here we have our old friend Phinehas again. Phinehas, son of Eleazar, is third in glory. Eleazar is second, Phinehas is third. Because of his zeal in fear of the Lord and the way he atoned for Israel. Hence a covenant of peace was sealed with him, making him the governor of both sanctuary and people, as we have in the Maccabean period. They are both the secular and priestly governors, and securing to him and his descendants the high priestly dignity forever. You see, Phinehas is very important. There was one covenant made with David of the tribe of Judah for royal succession, and the implication here is one covenant made with Phinehas for priestly succession. That's why the Maccabees raised the covenant of Phinehas. This is the mindset of this period. Joshua, Caleb, Solomon, Elijah, 48. He decimated God's enemies with his zeal, 48:3. Shut up the heavens, stopped the rain. That's in the letter of James 2. Prayed for it not to rain, and then he prayed for it to rain. And the letter of James, chapter 4 to 5, I think, says, and the prayer of the righteous man affects much, is very efficacious. So Elijah is another zealot. So if John is a reborn Elijah, according to the New Testament, what's John? Another zealot. Do I think John is a zealot? Yes, I do. And I don't accept the Christian presentation of him at all in the way it's framed. Some of the aspects of it that are taken from Josephus, yes, but not the way it is parlayed into a presentation of the coming of the Prince of Peace or something. I don't think John sounds very peaceful in the New Testament, and I don't think he was very peaceful. And I don't think he was killed because he was looking forward to a peaceful time. And Josephus makes it quite clear that the presentation of the death, as I think I've already told you in the New Testament of John the Baptist, is inaccurate. And Josephus makes it clear, we can either choose the New Testament, the head on the table and the dance of the sexy woman, and the king who didn't want to kill him but had his head turned by women who made him crazy. It's in all art, Western art, from about the 1000s to the 20th century. Everyone loves to show the picture of Bloody John's head on the table, on the platter, with the sexy woman or whatever who seduced the Herodian governor to do what he didn't want to do. But Josephus says Herod executed John because he was afraid, since he was so popular, Josephus acknowledges, among the people, that they would do anything that he put it in their head to do, and therefore he executed him because he was afraid that he would suggest to them to revolt, and he didn't want to regret afterwards by showing magnanimity and generosity or kindness, and then having to face the situation that he thought he would have to face. So he thought it was better to do a preventive execution. Now, which sounds more believable? A king or a governor doing a preventive execution because he was afraid of the influence this person had over the people, or a woman doing a sexy dance? That absolves the king and makes him not guilty. And this is my problem with all those kinds of stories. All of them whitewash Herodian officials and Roman governors. And therefore I'm very tough on those stories, very tough on those stories. You don't have a problem with it in your life. Why should you? You're not involved in it. We're out here in California. What does it matter to you? But if you're worried about the history of Palestine and those things, then it does matter. So those stories absolve the foreign governors and the foreign occupiers of responsibility in these deaths. Pontius Pilate, I think his wife comes to him and says, do not have anything to do with this righteous man, or she has a dream the night before or something, I forget what it is. And Pontius Pilate wipes his hands of it and doesn't want any responsibility in this death, and so on and so forth. There's even gospels written in the name of Pontius Pilate, apocryphal gospels, because they even show him ultimately as a believer. I reject all those stories as stories that are currying favor with the Roman authorities, and have very little to do with Palestinian history. To my mind, excuse me if I'm a bad fellow for that, but you make your choices. I'm telling you what I, have been forced to conclude. Well, anyway, if Elijah is a zealot, which was the point of all this, so is John. And Elijah, as we'll see in Maccabee books, has a burning zeal for the Lord. And as Elijah is praised in the book of James. And I don't think that James, as Martin Luther said, the book of James, the letter of James, shouldn't be in the New Testament. And he's right. It's a Qumran, more in the Qumran spirit than in the general New Testament spirit. It's at odds with them, and Martin Luther objected to it. He said it shouldn't be in the canon. I feel it's probably the only authentic work in the canon representing Palestinian Christianity, maybe not overseas Christianity. The rest is Pauline overseas Christianity. Quite fine. It's nothing wrong with that religion, and it's quite, as we know, has attracted the world for 2,000 years, and many people are very enamored of it and extremely moved and involved in it. So there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're looking for Palestinian history is what we're talking about. Has it anything to do with Palestinian history? That's what you have to decide. Ezekiel saw the vision of glory, the chariots of fire and so on, line 10, 8 to 10. The chariots with the cherubs. Zerubbabel we didn't mention. Zerubbabel was the king that returned after Cyrus declared the return from the Babylonian captivity in the 540s. He returned with Jesus ben Jehozadak, line 12. Jeshua son of Jehozadak, 49:12. And that's when they started building the temple. And great too is Nehemiah, no Ezra. The second or third book that doesn't mention Ezra. And finally, the whole point of this book, to praise his ancestors. But it was the high priest, Simon son of Onias, who repaired, chapter 50, the temple during his lifetime, who laid the foundations to the double height and buttressed the temple precincts. So this person is praising Onias' ancestor, father actually. And it shows him doing a priestly atonement. Like line 13, youthful cedar of Lebanon, surrounded by trunks of palm trees. Now, as I told you, this book was found in the Cairo Geniza. It's also been found among the Dead Sea Scrolls in fragmented form. And another copy of it, which is a crucial connection, was found, in Hebrew that is, at Masada, where the Jews, the zealots, the extreme zealots, made their last stand and committed suicide. So that tightens the connection by all those three locations. Cairo Geniza, Masada, and Qumran all have Hebrew versions of Ecclesiasticus. Tightens it further. I do believe that the Masada people were refugees from Qumran, who went there for protection and final sanctuary, and just didn't happen for them because the Romans were more persistent than they imagined they would be. We'll get to that. But look how this ends. In the one that was found in Cairo and in Masada, it also includes the Zealot Covenant for Simon. He was a zealot for the laws, and it also speaks that he was a true son of Zadok. So it mentions both the Zealot Covenant, that is of Phinehas, the zeal of Phinehas for Simon, and it also mentions he was a true son of Zadok, what we would like to call in this class the Zadokite Covenant. So this priesthood has both the Zealot and Zadokite covenants operating for it. You'll say, what is the Zadokite covenant? This person here in rabbinic literature that it's describing is called Simeon the Tzaddik. So not only is he a true high priest, He's also a tzaddik, a righteous one. Later on in Christian literature, what is Jesus' brother James going to be called? James the Just, James the Tzaddik. I submit to you that in some form of righteousness, Zadokite covenant is operating on behalf of James for the high priesthood. Finally, the letter to the Hebrews. What's, as we said last time, the covenant for Jesus? A priest of higher purity and righteousness, the letter of the Hebrews. No wonder it's written to the Hebrews says. Jesus is such a high priest, both king and high priest, like all these others. And he is a high priest of the order of Melchizedek, or Melchizedek. Melchizedek is another Zadokite type allusion. Because once again, Melech is king, Zedek is righteousness. You know enough Hebrew now in this class to know that. King of righteousness, a priesthood after the order of a king of righteousness. A righteous high priesthood. So I'm submitting to you that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, what they're after is a righteous, perhaps genealogically pure high priesthood. We'll talk about that as we go along. But certainly, Zadokite can be both symbolic as well as actual. Who's the first Zadok? The high priest in David's temple. So the first high priest of the first temple was Zadok. So the line of Zadok that all these people are claiming they're authentic priests comes down from Phinehas through Zadok to these people here in the 2nd and 1st century. Now the question that's being raised by some of these people, Maccabees 2 for instance, is, are these real high priests? Is Onias' brother a real high priest? No, he's not, because he's a creep. He's not righteous. He's a traitor, he's not pious, he's not a zealot, and so on and so on. So you have to kind of combine all these things, and that's what's so interesting, that the Hebrew version has both of those in the description of this Simon, the high priest here. Look at this. I told you in passing, there are 2 nations, line 25, that my soul detests. No brotherly love lost here. And the third is no nation at all. The inhabitants of Mount Seir, they're the Edomites, across the Jordan in the desert there, now called Idumeans in this Roman period, Idumeans, and the Philistines, the inhabitants of the coastline, and that stupid people living at Shechem. And who are the stupid people living at Shechem? The Samaritans. And it says they're no people at all. So, I mean, okay, I'm not advocating this. I just want to show you how things were looked on in 150 BC. And then this is the writing that was committed to Jesus ben Sira, Jesus son of Sira. This is the writing by Jesus son of Sira, and so on and so forth. Well, he's the actual author of this book, so often this book is called in Hebrew Ben Sira. Instead of Ecclesiasticus, it's called Ben Sira after its actual author. So we have a lot of information here. Okay, I don't want to hurry. I want to get back to where I was. So that clarifies a few things there, right, about who this Onias is. So he's killed. Onias is his son of this person. So now, let's go and see what happens after he's killed. Find where I was. 2 Maccabees. Okay. So, in chapter 3, he had first observed the law perfectly as possible, and was zealot for the law and piety, and was a protection of the people. By the way, there's someone called Tobias in line 11. Tobias is one of the books of the Apocrypha. Josephus identifies them as a priestly clan living over in Transjordan called the Tobiates. So that is really a real thing. Let's see, chapter 4 here. Simon was the brother, well, he was an informer, and then he had Jason was Onias' brother, he usurped the high priesthood. A lot of trouble here. The end of chapter 4, 30 to 38, the murder of Onias in Antioch. Antioch is where the Pauline Christians get their start, supposedly. It's the capital of the Seleucid Empire. Line 37, on the 36, 37, on the king's return from Cilicia, the Jews of the capital and those Greeks who shared their hatred of the crime appealed to him about the murder of Onias. He was put to death in defiance of all justice, says line 35. So Menelaus and Jason vie with each other for the high priesthood. And it's at that point in chapter 5:11 that Antiochus Epiphanes finally is introduced. And he plunders the temple. And these Menelaus, and he's called a traitor to the law, 916, to some extent is involved in bringing him in to inspect the treasury. And of course he made off in line 21 with 1,800 talents of gold. Mount Gerizim is the, line 23, is the Samaritan sanctuary, and he's rifling that too. Line 27, chapter 5, picks up where Maccabees 1 basically started to develop into. Judas, called Maccabeus, with 9 others, withdrew into the wilderness and lived like wild animals in the hills with his companions, eating nothing but wild plants to avoid contracting defilement. What is that? Huh?
And to avoid
Lots of things here. First of all, the 10 just men. For the sake of 10 just men, God will withhold destruction from the earth. 10 righteous ones, 10 Zadokites. It's in the book of Genesis, the second Zadik episode. The first Zadik episode is Noah the righteous. Noah the righteous is mentioned as Noah the righteous in Ecclesiasticus. That's what he's called. All this is in my Maccabees Zadokites book. I want to read it in more detail. In Genesis, Lot is down in Sodom and Gomorrah, down in the plain, and Abraham is up on the hillside, and the angels come and visit Abraham. And they say they're going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. And Abraham pleads with, turns out it's God he's talking to, God and 2 angels, 3 men, 3 wise men, if you want to call the Matthew story. And he bargains with him like a person in a marketplace. He said, you know, God, don't destroy that town. Suppose there are 50 righteous men, 50 just men, 50 tzaddikim. By the way, just comes from the Latin, justice, J-U-S-T-U-S. The Greek is dikaios, and the Hebrew is tzaddik. So just, when we say James the Just, it's the Latin. In any case, for the sake of 50 just men, will you withhold destruction? And God says, yeah, okay, 50 just men. And Abraham says, oh, come, Lord, you know, suppose there are only 40 just men. Okay, 40. Oh, God, come on now, come on. What about there's only 20? He says, okay, 20. Oh, suppose there are only 10. He said, okay, for the sake of 10 just men, I will withhold destruction from the city. And that's turned into a Jewish kind of legend, the legend of the 10 just men, for whose sake God will withhold destruction from the earth. The 10 Zadokim, and that's what we have here, I think. Judas with 9 others withdrew into the wilderness. And what do we have here? The first wilderness exodus episode. This is a prelude to John the Baptist. Judas is a forerunner of John the Baptist. But he's not, that's why you have to get out of your head the peaceful idea of John the Baptist. You have to see him more in this tradition. Why is Judas withdrawing into the wilderness? Because the world is polluted and corrupt, just like John, if you want to say, in the New Testament. But the other thing is, the only difference between the New Testament and this is that the Pax Romanum has been introduced into the New Testament. Now, you can say that's authentic and Jesus, or you can say that was introduced by the Pax Romanum supporters. You know where I stand on that. I don't want to go into it. Don't go there, Diane, as Mel Gibson said to Diane Sawyer in the episode about his father being a Holocaust denier. Don't go there, Eisenman. I want to go into whether the Pax Romanum was introduced into the material or not. Don't forget, Augustus built a temple of peace in the center of Rome, and we've recently uncovered and archaeologically, discovered again, really impressive temple monument right in the center of Rome. Okay, so they lived like wild animals, like John did, in the hills with his companions. They are before John. Now that's why I say Maccabees 2 is sometimes more detailed than Maccabees 1. Maccabees 1 does not bother with this kind of information. Do I believe it? Yeah, I believe it. I don't see anything wrong with it. Why are they eating only wild plants to avoid contracting impurity, pollution, defilement? Because the whole thing has been taken over by this pagan sort of situation. A statue of the Olympian Zeus has been constructed in the temple precincts. The temple sacrifice has been ended. The righteous sacrifice, starting with who? Noah the righteous. How come all the animals on the ark weren't destroyed? Well, okay, they weren't eating, they were somehow not eating each other. I don't know, it's all big sort of nice children's mythological tale which captivates all humanity up till the present day because it's such an attractive story. But the point is that after, they were not eating meat at that time. They were not permitted to eat meat even during the ark journey or whatever. After the ark was on dry land and he had all the animals in there, Noah offered a sacrifice to propitiate God. And at that time, he was allowed to consume meat as long as he did what? Did not eat the blood, because the life of the animal was in the blood. Again, just total ban in Palestine on the communion idea. Eating the body and blood or drinking the blood of Christ Jesus, that would just be out of the question in Palestine. That's clear. Out of the question in the Dead Sea Scrolls too. Out of the question, I think, in the letter of in the rulings of James, abstain from, how does he put it? Fornication, things sacrificed to idols, strangled things, and blood, or the other way around. It's abstain from blood. Those are the rulings of James in Acts 15 and 21. Acts 15 and Acts 21. The end of the Jerusalem Conference. Even Acts admits that you're not to eat blood. Well, then how do you get, even a symbolic consumption of blood? I don't think you do for Palestinian Christians. Overseas Christians, okay. Because it's in Paul's letters. It's in 1 Corinthians. This is my body and blood, my blood. Drink this in memory of me, and so on. It's in 1 Corinthians 11 or something. We don't have time to do all that. That's historical Jesus. But the point is that you couldn't, even in the Noah story, there are 2 lines of the text line that are conflated together. If you do an Old Testament course, you'd see it with me. One we call the E line, the other we call the Y line, the always line, the always line. And if you can actually unconflate them. And the thing is that the second line realized that you couldn't go 2 by 2 into the ark. one line has you go 2 by 2 in the ark, but it probably didn't have the sacrifice at the end of the ark. Now the problem is the line that has the sacrifice at the end of the line has to go of the clean animals, of the unclean animals, 1 by 1, or 2 by 2. But of the clean animals, 7 each. You've got to have enough animals there for Noah to sacrifice without ending the species. So the one line realizes that, changes the numbers. I know I'm puzzling you. You guys don't know the Noah story that well, but you do, so you understand that. But that's what we do in an Old Testament class. We show the different lines. How many have done an Old Testament class with me on this? You've done. But you saw the different lines. Okay, so you saw the lines in an Old Testament class. That's good. So the point is that that story is a famous conflation of 2 different lines. Okay. So now, shortly afterwards, the king sent an old man from Athens to compel. So the point is, I should finish up here about why the temple sacrifice was not functioning in a proper manner any longer, and probably was not functioning at all. Therefore, in my view, the permission to eat meat and probably vegetables of a cultivated Qumran had been withdrawn. And only with the reestablishment of the temple sacrifice, which was the continuation of the Noah propitiation situation, were you once more permitted to eat meat. So the vegetarianism is not an ascetic vegetarianism here. It's a vegetarian contingent upon a polluted world. A world where the temple has been defiled. So he only eats wild plants because those are things growing of themselves. Now I think John the Baptist probably behaved exactly the same way. And I think the scroll people probably were very similar. And I think John is a representative person of the scrolls, but we'll get to that later. But the point is that John is pictured as eating only honey and locusts. Well, what happened when there were no honey around? And suppose the locusts weren't swarming. What did he eat? I'm not sure. Some people question whether that locust is a proper translation from Hebrew into Greek. May have been some sort of, I read some, I think Robert Eisler's Science of Jesus and John the Baptist suggested that it's actually a translation from Hebrew into Greek of a word that meant some kind of honey cake of some kind. In any case, I don't think John ate locusts, frankly. I don't think he sat boiling up locusts, frankly. I think that probably is a mistake in the tradition. More like Judas Maccabee, wild things growing of themselves. In any case, he couldn't live on locusts because who knows if there were any locusts in the season that he was going around. So, I mean, that's just not an accurate presentation. That's, it's good enough, but I don't think I think this is more accurate in terms of what these wilderness-dwelling people would have done. Now, I don't know if John is in this tradition. You'll have to decide for that. So the point is that they're eating things growing of themselves because those are not polluted. Okay, so now here we get the information that he sent a man to the Jews to have them abandon their ancestral customs and live no longer by the law of God, 6:2, and profane the temple in Jerusalem and dedicate it to the Olympian Zeus, and also the sanctuary in Mount Gerizim, the Samaritan sanctuary. So that's how we know that it was dedicated to the Olympian Zeus. That's the abomination of the desolation of Daniel. And we're going to hear presently that he actually erected a statue of the Olympian Zeus in the temple. Now here are some really bad things going on here. The temple was filled with debauchery, prostitution, no Sabbath keeping. They ate the sacrificial entrails. A decree was issued, good picture of the times, in the neighboring cities, obliging them to share these meals, executing all who did not voluntarily conform to Greek customs. For example, 2 women were charged with having circumcised their children. They were paraded publicly around the town with their babies hung around their breasts and hurled over the city wall. You believe that? Well, it's lurid, but it's possible. That's what they would do, I'm sure, in lots of places. The Nazis did I would say 3 million times worse than that. Other people assembled in caves to keep the seventh day without attracting attention were denounced and all burned there together, since their consciences, Paul uses the word conscience as a euphemism for the law, would not allow them to defend themselves. So they did not yet know that they could fight on the Sabbath. That shows how alien they were to being a military people at this time. Because I'm sure in David's time they fought on the Sabbath. If you didn't fight on the Sabbath, you're going to be attacked on the Sabbath all the time. And you're going to be killed. So what do we have? Back to Maccabees 1. What's the first ruling Mattathias makes? That they can fight on the Sabbath in a defensive manner to protect life. Later on, Jesus is pictured as doing the same thing. In those days, chapter 2. Okay, wait, hold on here. This is the parallel here in chapter 1. After 2 years, line 29, the king sent a Mysar through the cities of Judah, dealing it a terrible blow. They shed innocent blood around the sanctuary. The sanctuary became deserted like the wilderness. This seems more accurate. Then the king issued a proclamation, line 41, that they had to renounce their peculiar customs. All the pagans conformed, profaning the Sabbath. He sent a message to Jerusalem and Judah, directing them to adopt the foreign customs, banning Holocaust sacrifices, libations, defiling the temple, sacred precincts, building altars, sacrificing pigs and other unclean animals, leaving their sons uncircumcised, prostituting themselves to all kinds of things, and so on and so forth. So it was after that that Mattathias leads his revolt. And then in chapter 2:29, some of them had gone into hiding in the desert, 32, and they were slaughtered out there because they wouldn't fight on the Sabbath. When the news reached Mattathias, line 39, and his friends, they said to each other, if we all do this, as our brothers did, and refuse to fight on the Sabbath for our lives and institutions, they will destroy us. So then the ruling is made, if anyone attacks us on the Sabbath, whoever he may be, we will resist him. We must not be killed as our brothers were killed. So Mattathias and his comrades make the ruling that they can defend themselves on the Sabbath. Then they were joined by a community of Hasideans. Here's our first reference to Hasideans, line 42. Each a stout fighting man of Israel, a volunteer on the side of the law. So more volunteers on the law. They organized themselves in an armed force, striking down sinners in their anger, renegades in their fury. Mattathias went around with these people, overthrowing the altars, forcibly circumcising all boys found uncircumcised. They hunted down the backsliders, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, his days come to a close, line 49. And he gives his farewell speech, which I'll pick up next time. But let me go back then in his burial here. And then Judas chapter 3 takes over. But let's go back here to this presentation before we finish here. So you see in line 12 of chapter 6 of Maccabees 2, they don't know that yet. And it's Maccabees 1 makes the ruling that Mattathias said they could defend themselves on the Sabbath. I'm sure David's army fought on the Sabbath, otherwise they would never have been effective. Just that they'd forgotten all these things. Then, line 18, Eliezer, important teacher of the law, resolved to die with honor and make a good death, line 28, eagerly and generously, rather than conform to the holy legislation. 31, and he died, leaving by his death an example of nobility and a record of virtue for the young. and also for the great majority of the nation. So what happens here? The end of chapter 6 and the beginning of chapter 7 are martyrdom tales about why you should make a good death eagerly and generously for the venerable and holy laws. And if you did this, then you would surely be resurrected. So, line 7, 9, the 7 brothers. As one of the brothers is taking his last breath, he says, "Inhuman fiend, you may discharge me from the present life, but the King of the world will raise us up, since it is for his laws that we die, to live again forever." All right, so what do we have here? And I'll pick up there next time. We have the resurrection of the dead as part of the Maccabean uprising. It's part also of the book of Daniel. That melds Daniel into the Maccabean uprising. The resurrection of the dead is to promote martyrdom. Later in Christianity, it's the same purpose. Here, Jesus actually is someone who was resurrected according to Christianity. But here, it's to encourage people to make a good death for the holy and venerable laws. We'll show the 7 brothers episode in chapter 7 next time. But chapter 8, you see, we have Judas and his army, about 6,000, go around and make all these attacks, etc., 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 etc. One last point before you go, I want you to think about, look at chapter 7 of Maccabees 1. I just want to keep you one last minute, give you a good place to think about these things. A new ruler, Demetrius, we heard about him in the original letter of, I think, 2 Maccabees. The renegades and God comes into power in the Seleucid Empire. The renegades and godless men in Israel, line 5, led by one Alchemus. It's with Alchemus that Maccabees 2 ends. Wanted to become the high priest. He was a wretch and a godless person, line 9. And he got the high priesthood from this foreign king, and he came with references from this king. The first among the Israelites to ask for peace terms were the Hasideans, line 13 and 14. So they, according to this, were prepared to abandon Judas for a priest appointed by foreign power, just because he seemed to have some legitimate priestly blood in his veins. But look at chapter 14 of Maccabees 2. A certain Alchemus, line 3, a former high priest who had willfully incurred defilement at the time of the insurrection, realized whichever way he turned, there was no security for him. So he went to the king, line 6, and he told him, "Those Jews called Hasideans, who are led by Judas Maccabee, are warmongers, rebels who are preventing the kingdom from finding stability. That is why, after being deprived of my hereditary dignity, I mean the priesthood, I have come here now. And as long," finally in line 10, "as Judas remains alive, the state will not enjoy peace." So in Maccabees 2, the Hasideans are the followers of Judas Maccabee par excellence. In Maccabees 1, they are originally followers, but are backsliders. In Maccabees 2, they are the followers. What I'm going to say next time is that there are 2 groups of Hasideans. One compromising, one, if you like, more purist, uncompromising, not backsliding. The second group are the Kiddushim, the holy ones of Daniel, the Maccabean warriors par excellence. In time, the word Hasidim fell away. And I call these 2 groups Pharisee Hasidans, meaning splitter away Hasidans, and Zadokite Hasidans, purist Hasidans. And then we get what's left in the next period of time, the 1st century BC, Pharisees and Zadokites. And the Zadokites will be the purest followers of Judas Maccabee. Then the Zadokites will split into Herodian Sadducees and Qumran Zadokites. And once again, the righteous Zadokites will be the Qumran Zadokites. The compromising Zadokites will be the Herodian Sadducees of the New Testament. We'll try to do all that for you next time, but that's what I want you to look at in this book. Sorry to keep you, I apologize to keep you over, but try to find a convenient place to stop.